welcome to The Link Online. And as we look at some photos of cities and towns and landscapes across Canada, we will soon be joined in the studio, and you will see our lovely faces here with myself, Mark Montgomery, and joining me today is Terry Haig.
Hi, Mark.
And Levon isn't with us today, but he did leave us a story. Now, first of all, I want to say also thank you to our crew that is behind the scenes here. We have Marc-André Deschamps and Benoit Durand and Commander Dutil. He knows everything. He's got the keys to all the cabinets. He knows where all the equipment is hidden.
And the paper.
And he knows
it all. He knows
and
everything.
he knows how things work. So whenever we have a problem, we go to him. One of the things that we have, I saw this the other day on the French program. You'll notice, by the way, that our hair and makeup staff are on vacation. This is why we look
for
this
yourself.
way.
This is the look. I paid a lot of money for this haircut.
Yeah.
What's the other side I'm trying to... Yeah.
It's backwards, you know.
It's back. Oh, it's backwards. It's like a mirror?
Kind of.
A camera? I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of things you didn't realize.
But I didn't realize it was backwards.
Well, see, touch the right side of your face. See?
All these years. Okay.
You learn something new.
You learn something every day. Okay.
You know this is a Canadian
Jeez.
show. Because,
what does that mean?
No.
We're harmless?
We apologize. I'm sorry.
We apologize. That's right. We apologize right off the bat.
We have a great graphic, as they call it, that the guys have come up with, and it shows that it's a Canadian. Do you have the flag there? Let's run the flag across the screen. With the sound effects. Isn't that great?
Lily St. Cyr. Okay.
That's great.
That was good. That was really cool.
I like that.
Do that
now,
again,
anyway, I want to say hello to our listeners on World Radio Paris, the shortwave service from Germany, and Kauri 97.5 FM radio in Nigeria, who also join us. And, of course, you can watch us live now on Facebook and on the Radio Canada International channel on YouTube, and, of course, our own website as well. Coming up in the program, again, lots of interesting things, serious subjects. Levon isn't with us, but he did leave us a story, Terry.
He left us a story about an international charge of genocide leveled against Myanmar and Canada's position on that issue.
And I have a story that it's kind of scary. Bacteria are becoming more and more resistant to the drugs used against them. And a new report says it's getting much worse, and hundreds of thousands of people could die over the next 30 years.
Well, I'm looking forward to that one.
It's serious.
That'll be an up story. Anyway,
you have another story as well.
We have something moving. I think we remember the fallen Canadian soldiers of wars and conflicts, the Remembrance Poppy, and the great poem that you've brought up to light many times, In Flanders Fields.
All right, those are some of the subjects coming up today on The Link Online. All right, Levon, as we mentioned, is not with us, but he did leave us this story. And earlier this week, Gambia launched a lawsuit against Myanmar in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And Gambia alleges that Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, has committed genocide against its Rohingya minority.
More than 700,000 Rohingya refugees were forced to flee Myanmar for Bangladesh in 2017 after a vicious government crackdown against the Muslim minority group. Canada recognized the crimes against the Rohingya as genocide with a unanimous vote in the House of Commons in 2018. And for more on Gambia's submission, Levon spoke to Canadian international law expert Payam Akhavan.
Now, Mr. Akhavan is a former UN prosecutor and professor of international law at McGill University here in Montreal. And Mr. Akhavan was part of Gambia's legal team that launched the lawsuit. And Levon spoke to him on his cell phone in The Hague.
Gambia is the plaintiff, the state which has initiated the case under the Genocide Convention. And any nation which is a party to that convention has a right to call on any other member of that treaty to respect its obligations to prevent and punish genocide and not to commit genocide. So, the world has, talked about stopping genocide, preventing genocide after Bosnia, after Rwanda, after Darfur, and then after 2 years of ongoing atrocities against the Rohingya minority, Gambia said enough is enough and brought this case, which is historic because unlike the case of Bosnia versus Serbia, this is not a country which is directly affected. So it's really Gambia as a disinterested, if you like, altruistic state, bringing this case really on behalf of the entire international community, on behalf of humanity. So I think it's quite historic. And the hope is that scrutiny of Myanmar's violations of international law will hopefully help alleviate the suffering of the some 600,000 Rohingya that remain still in Myanmar, most of them having already been subject to extreme violence and expulsion. There are some 1 million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. So this case is historic and it's highly significant. It's an example of moral leadership on the global stage, and it's worthy of everyone's support.
That was Canadian international law expert Payam Akavan. He is a former UN prosecutor and professor of international law at McGill University in Montreal. Mr. Akavan was part of Gambia's legal team that launched the genocide lawsuit against the government of Myanmar for its treatment of the Rohingya Muslim minority. Livon reached him on his cell phone in The Hague.
You know, it's curious because the country was certainly under the dictatorship of the military for so many years, and the leader Aung San Suu Kyi was lauded for her stand in trying to combat that, and now she's in charge, and this is the situation.
Is she in charge? She's not really in charge. She still has to play games with the army, right?
Yeah, it's a delicate situation, I say, but it is kind of
She's
interesting.
an honorary Canadian citizen. I think 1 of 3 in the world, 4 in the world, right?
Yeah. And that was again because of the stance when the dictatorship of the military was in power, and she was trying to fight against that. Anyway, the Rohingya situation is certainly a terrible, terrible situation. If you look at that, we've had Canadian diplomats go over there to study this and come back, and they said this is it really is terrible. These people are suffering badly. So hopefully something will come of that. Coming up in just a moment on the program, we're going to take a look at a serious situation regarding bacteria. Well, Terry, you know what superbugs are? You've heard that expression, right? Mm-hmm. These are what are they? They are the bugs.
Volkswagens?
No, this is serious now.
Okay.
These are the bacteria that are resistant to
it's horrible.
antibiotic drugs that we use to treat them. Now, the fact is right now there's a staggering 26% of bacterial infections can't be treated with the drugs. 1 out of 4. Yeah, exactly. 1 out of 4 can't be treated with the drugs that we have right now.
Smoke.
I was surprised at that as well because that's really serious.
This is around the world or in Canada?
Well, this is in Canada right now.
Okay.
So that's really surprising because you think of Canada as a very up to date medical
and you can
country.
pick one up when you go to the hospital for something else, right?
Well, this is the concern now. So right now it's at 26% of bacteria are resistant to our current level of drugs. And what happened was a wide-ranging team of experts, and this includes microbiologists, veterinary medicine experts, economists. They all got together to discuss this, and they put out a report that's truly frightening. That says within just 30 years, the amount of resistance will likely climb to 40%. And that will jeopardize all these surgeries, the things that you just mentioned. Open heart surgery, appendix removals, joint replacements, even childbirth, even, when you get a tooth pulled, for example. These things, you could get infected with a bug that can't be treated. And the report said, by 2050, infections could claim the lives of 400,000 Canadians. And
by when?
2050. That's 30 years from now. And it could cost the economy $500 billion. Now, I spoke with Professor Jerry Wright. He is the director of the Michael de Groot Center of Infectious Disease Research at McMaster University in Hamilton. And in this segment, I asked if the figure of as much as 40% resistance in the future was really accurate.
Yeah, so this is the secret in the field, right, is that this is a creeping change over time. It's 26% now, and we projected into the future that it could get to be 40%, I think, which is a reasonable number, and other people around the world have projected even 100%, but that seems a little unlikely to me. But 26%, that means that these are bacteria that otherwise in the past we had no problem treating with the currently available antibiotics. And now we're shuffling about. We're using really old antibiotics to deal with some of our really severe problems, and that has a downside, and that means because a lot of those older ones come with toxic side effects. In some cases, we have to throw our hands up in the air and say we have nothing to treat you. The drug companies have been stymied by the scientific challenges of finding new antibiotics, but more importantly by the economic challenges. It costs a lot of money to make a drug. It costs just as much money to make an antibiotic as it costs to make a new blood pressure drug. Antibiotics are used a very short period of time, and they cure disease. You'll take your blood pressure medicine for the rest of your life. And so the economics don't make sense anymore for companies to be involved in.
To some extent, I'm understanding that finding new antibiotics is difficult in the first place, but what you're saying is also part of the equation is simply a profit motive by the companies.
Yeah, sure. It's not unreasonable. These companies have to have a return on investment. They're not charities. And if they can't make sufficient amount of money to recoup the amount of investment it took to make that antibiotic in the first place, then they're not going to be profitable. Their shareholders aren't going to be happy with them, and they need to do something else. But compounded on top of that, as you pointed out correctly, is that it's hard to do. So the antibiotics that most of us use today were all discovered, between the 1940s and the 1960s, and they came mostly from bacteria and molds that live in the soil. And so we've been mining those for years and years, and we keep finding the same old things over and over again now. And so it makes finding new candidate drugs extremely difficult and extremely expensive. So you put that together with the constant evolution by the bacteria of resistance, and so bacteria are always going to be one step ahead.
What comes out of this if this is the situation and we're not getting new drugs and the bacteria themselves are evolving to overcome the drugs we have? What's the solution? What can you offer?
That's a great question. So part of the reason of doing the report and having the symposium, as you pointed out, this coming Thursday and Friday at McMaster, is to provide us an opportunity to advocate to our peers, to advocate to citizens. It's really a time for a call to action. We have an opportunity now. Now that we know how grave the problem is, we can no longer ignore it. So we're hoping that by raising attention, by making sure that we have real numbers that are not estimates, this is the best numbers that we could get. And now with this report that provides concrete numbers for that. So now we have the evidence, and the response has been positive so far. And I hope the attention will be sustained so that we can address this problem. Otherwise, I shudder to think of what happens if we don't.
And that was Professor Jerry Wright. He is the director of the Michael de Groot Center of Infectious Disease Research at McMaster University in Hamilton. And the full story with the links to the report and other related stories to this subject are on the website in the highlights section of the website. It is truly scary when you think about it.
Horrifying.
When we, because now, you get an infection and they treat you with antibiotics and everything is good. What we fail to realize is that, as you said, these drugs were developed between 1940 and 1960. And prior to that time, people died all the time of infections, simple infections. They just, there was nothing they could do. Medicine wasn't advanced. And if you get infected with a bacteria and you die. And he said now, because of this, nowadays, right now, about over 5,000 people in Canada die because they can't treat the infections because of this situation where the bacteria, that particular bacteria, is resistant. And I was listening to a talk show the other day, and a woman called in about her husband who had undergone an operation, and he got an infection from possibly an improperly cleaned tool used in the operation. And they tried to treat it with the drugs, and it went down, but it didn't go away. And it came back a couple of months later, and they tried it again. It went down, and within a year, he died because of an infection that normally would have been easy to treat. But it's one of these superbug things, So it's really kind of scary when you think that something that is right now treatable, an infection of some kind, because it's not yet superbug. It's not one of the 26%. Maybe it's one of the 75% that still works. In a short time, what they're saying is that could very likely increase to 40% resistance. So whatever that particular infection might be, within a couple of decades, they might not be able to treat it. And you or somebody may die because they just can't treat that infection anymore.
I fear so much for the kids, Mark, the young people. My God. I mean, look at the environment we're leaving them. And look at this. I mean, what they have to deal with is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's mind-boggling, actually. I mean, if 40% of Canadians won't be able to take antibiotics to stop an infection, I mean, that's madness.
Well, what he says, for example, is that all the scientists are eager to do this, to research this stuff, but it takes money. And the other thing is, it takes time. Time isn't something that they can negotiate with, but money is. And he's saying what he says is in this report, what the medical community around the world is trying to do is say, look, we need investment. Because the drug companies, as he pointed out, they're not charities. They have responsibility to their shareholders. And they can't invest the billions of dollars into finding new drugs.
Why can't governments invest billions of dollars?
Well, that's the thing. What he says is we want to incite the policymakers to invest in this kind of thing because what the governments understand, for example, maybe not necessarily life or death, but they understand economy. And as he said, by 2050, this could cost just the Canadian economy alone over $500 billion. Part of that is in hospital expenses, which are going to go up. Obviously, you're trying madly to treat someone and it's not working out all that well. The person is in the hospital longer. It takes more doctors and nurses and staff to try to deal with it. And while they're dealing with that, they're not dealing with other patients, and other situations. And the other thing is lost productivity to the economy, which again amounts to, according to economists on this panel, hundreds of billions of dollars, like I say, over $500 billion by 2050. So maybe what they're hoping, these doctors and all these other experts are saying is maybe by putting hard numbers in this report, the governments and policymakers and the citizens will say, wait a minute, we have to invest in this. We need to invest in this because I don't want to die and I don't want my friends to die or my family to die of a simple infection. So we can.
I don't remember this being part of the campaign of any recent election campaign. I mean, it's pretty much kept quiet, right?
Well, this just came out, so I mean, it's still kind of new. It just
came out, but I mean, the guys must know.
The scientific community knows about this, but the general population, I mean, doesn't know. I didn't know about this. 26% is untreatable. So what they hope to do is say, look, everybody, this is a major and very serious issue. Pay attention to this. There's so much news going on that these kind of stories don't always get out there because it's not a new story in that sense. Doctors and so on have known for years, and occasionally we have done little stories on this and say, it's superbugs are growing and so on and so forth, but it's never really caught the attention of the mainstream media in a major way. And again, what they're hoping with this report is they said, he says also in the interview, we talk about this, and the first question people ask is, yeah, okay, that's in theory. Where are the numbers?
Well, it's probably something's not going to happen, and this goes for virtually anything, until it happens to someone in a powerful person's family, right? When it happens to a powerful person, then all of a sudden, say a big donor to governments or whatever, then action gets taken. No,
That could very well be the case. But what they're hoping, at least, is this is now we're saying the same message as we said before, but in this report, now we're saying, look, here are the numbers to back this up, which they didn't really have before. So they're saying, again, hundreds of thousands of people will die, hundreds of billions of dollars in costs. So pay attention to this. So that's something that I thought was really interesting. And again, it's one of those stories, if you want to find out more about it, go to the website and look in the highlights section and find out about that there. All right, coming up, a human interest story of yours. That's coming up in just a moment. All right, Monday was November 11th, and November 11th every year is what used to be called Armistice Day. I think it's still Armistice Day in Britain, for example, but here in Canada it's Remembrance Day, and it got a bit more overwhelmed by the news about Don Cherry, and we can get into that a little bit later on. He's a former hockey coach and so on, a television personality. And he was fired over remarks related to Remembrance Day. Terry, you did a story on that.
I did. It's on the website. But I also did a story that is very, very close to your heart, Mark. As I was doing the research for the story, you've done many stories on this. I refer to the poem In Flanders Fields. It was written over 104 years ago as the First World War raged across Europe, written by a Canadian surgeon who was sitting in an ambulance in a part of Belgium that had already seen more than its fair share of war and would see a whole lot more during the rest of the 20th century, God knows. His name was John McCrae. He was taking a brief respite from the horror of a battle he had just witnessed, and the poem lives to this day in elementary schools where kids learn it, especially Canadian kids learn it, to the poppies that people around the world wear to commemorate those who died in the so-called Great Wars, and then from wars that came after it, and probably wars before, right? It honors all the war dead, I think, the poppies, right? Yeah. It's not just the First World War. Now, I spoke to a terrific Canadian actor named David Calderisi about that day, talking about when McCrae wrote it, what led up to it, and also about the poem itself.
Perhaps, Terry, the thing that goes maybe will go to your heart the way it goes to mine. What I've just described, that horror, the absolute nightmarish horror, this isn't just a poem that the man wrote.
Okay.
It's a very particular form of poetry. It's called a rondeau. And it was invented in medieval times. It was a favorite with civilized troubadours and in the 13th and 14th centuries. And it's a form which it makes very particular demands. McCrae wasn't just a dabbling guy, kind of, poetry. The rondeau requires 15 lines, 3 stanzas. The first stanza has 5 lines. The second stanza has 4 lines. The third stanza has 6 lines. You're only allowed to have 2 rhymes. It's a poem. So, in this gore of primitive, barbaric murder, this man has a grasp of civilization from centuries before, which informs his invention of this poem. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
It was actor David Calderisi reading John McCrae's In Flanders Fields, part of a conversation I had with Calderisi on Monday. It is on our website. I think it's a fascinating insight on David's part, which I didn't realize. I don't know if you realize that he, in the midst of this insanity, he kept touch with civilization that had gone before, taking something from the 13th and 14th century and making it work. So, I mean, he was obviously a sophisticated, educated man. He's a surgeon on top of everything else besides that, and was able to create this beauty. And I spent last weekend preparing to talk to David Calderisi, reading that poem over and over again, and I see why it touches you so much. I mean, basically, I spent much of the weekend crying as I read that poem. It's I don't know what comes first, form or content or form, but it's so moving that it goes straight to your heart.
Yeah. And he wrote it because one of his friends, his dear friend, had just been killed in an artillery attack or something, and he was heartbroken because it was a very good friend of his. And I guess to some extent he was also heartbroken by all the horrors that he saw that he had to deal with on a daily basis. He's a surgeon. All these people are coming in with various wounds and maimed and so on, and he has to try to patch them up. And it must have been, they talk about PTSD nowadays because, people witness car accidents or something, But I just can't imagine the kind of thing that he and the nursing staff and other doctors went through in that situation where you could be blown to bits by these artillery shells, millions of artillery shells, right? And
what a horrific war that was. I mean, people in trench. I mean, is any war? I mean, they're all pretty darn horrific, I would say. But of the ones that I've read anything about, I mean, the people in trenches, and we're talking about bacteria. How many people died just from disease because they had because they were gassed and they had to try to breathe through handkerchiefs soaked with urine. Yeah. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm reading this book about Homo sapiens right now. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'll tell you, man. Our tribe is, if it's a tribe, genus, whatever we are, we got to get it together, man.
Well, you talk about dying of disease. John McCrae himself died
3
just 3 years later of pneumonia, which, of course, nowadays...
He couldn't breathe. I mean, his lung, he had been gassed, right? I believe. I mean, he was there. I mean, he was right there. I mean, you couldn't escape it, really, right? Could you? I mean, you're a historian about war, but...
Well, no. Well, you could try to escape by running away, but...
Yeah, but you could put a handkerchief with urine over your nose, too. No, but that's insane. Yeah. But so is war. I mean, and what was it about exactly? Hey, you're an historian. What was it about?
That's a big question that people have often asked. What's it all about? But anyway, that's where the poppies came from.
Exactly, the poppies in that poem are now exactly
what we wear, and that was actually made popular by an American nurse.
Mm-hmm. And a French lady too.
But it didn't catch on in the States, but it caught on big in the Commonwealth countries like Britain and Canada and elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the whole Don Cherry thing, if you want to find out the genesis of this, it goes to Don Cherry, the hockey guy who was complaining about something regarding the poppies. He's a big supporter of the military, and he was saying that people aren't wearing poppies, and he seemed to target immigrants. And there's a whole big kerfuffle about that, and those stories are on our website as well. So if you want to find out more about that as well, check the website, rcinet.ca. And that's about all the time we have for today. So for Marc-André and Benoit and Pierre and Terry Haig and myself, Mark Montgomery, thanks for listening to us. And don't forget, if you can go to the website, download our app. On the side of the website, you'll see it there on the right-hand side. You can download the app and get all kinds of Canadian stories if you're interested in what's going on in Canada or what kind of thoughts Canadians have about world situations. Download the app. It's there. Until next week, bye-bye.